Hello everybody, we're back. Sorry it's been a while since I've done one of these videos, and if you're in a hurry, this video might get kind of long, so if you just want to cut to the chase, you want to know what my status is, here it is. Everything has and is happening according to plan. I'm back to work and back to normal life now, and I had a PET CT scan done 3 months after the stem cell transplant, which is about a month ago, and that revealed no sign of cancer. So far so good. Knock on wood, we can continue to do that. If you want to know the details of what I've been through in the last few months since the last update, then stay tuned, because here it comes.
Super proud of the way he's just approached this 2-year window, because it's nobody will have, unless he wants to write a book and tell every step of the way, nobody will understand what he's been through away from the game so long, and it shows how much this game matters to him.
A lot has happened since the last time I did one of these updates. This was the hardest part of everything that I've done. I'm starting to look back at my prior videos and laugh at what was going on. Like, one example is the end of my last video where I was jumping rope in the hospital. Yeah, that kind of thing didn't last very long. So that was when I checked into UCSF, and I checked in there on August 2nd. And the first thing they did was put a PIC IV line in my arm that ran about 2 feet into the middle of my chest, where your biggest arteries are. And then for the next 6 days after that, I was given intense chemotherapy treatment called BEAM, which that treatment killed all of my bone marrow and most of my blood cells, and obviously, hopefully, all of the lymphoma cells as well. Those chemo infusions were done in my hospital room every day from 10 a.m. until noon, and also 10 p.m. until around midnight for 6 days. And during that time, during those 6 days, because of all the liquid being pumped into me, I gained about 7 pounds. So then on the next day after all that was when the stem cell transplant was done, and that was also done in my hospital room. And to do that, they thawed out the stem cells that were taken out of my body 3 weeks before that, and reintroduced them back into my bloodstream. And this happened on August 9th, which also happens to be my mother's birthday. And they called that my second birthday in the hospital. And the nurses even brought me cake and sang happy birthday that day. They were really awesome. So when I got the transplant done, I felt like I had crossed a major milestone. I felt a lot of relief. I was kind of nervous about that time in between where I had the chemo in my body killing my blood, and before the stem cells were back in my body to start repairing it again. It's kind of a vulnerable period, but we got through that, and got the stem cells back infused through the same IV, and so the stem cells were stored somewhere like around minus 300 degrees, and they were kept at that temperature all the way until right before they were put back into my bloodstream. They had 4 bags of my stem cells, like this one, and they infused all those. It took basically all day to do all that. They thaw them out right there, right next to the bed, and then put them in the IV. And my wife and son were there to see that, and that was cool. And that was the last time I had any visitors in the hospital, because for the rest of the 2 weeks I was there, my energy level was really low, and I was really vulnerable to any kind of germs or viruses, anything at all. So it just wasn't worth it. Throughout this whole ordeal, I've learned a few things about our blood, and I need to share some of that with you so that you can understand this better. So, our blood consists of basically three main components: plasma, red blood cells, and white blood cells. And there's a bunch more details within each of these. Stem cells are immature, brand new blood cells that are created and live in the bone marrow. Stem cells are like the raw material of blood because they're capable of becoming any of the blood cells, any type of blood cell. The lymphoma that's been bothering me was caused by a B cell within the white blood cell group that went haywire. Our blood is normally made up of about 55% plasma, about 45% red blood cells, and then 1% is white blood cells, platelets, and other things. So you can see it's red blood cells make up the majority of the really functional part of the blood. So the beam chemotherapy that I was given killed all of my white blood cells, and so it should have killed off the cancer cells too. It also killed all of my bone marrow and most of my red blood cells, and this would have killed me if not for having those stem cells that they had taken out of me to put back in and reboot my whole system. And that's what happened. So immediately after my stem cells were back in my body, they went into my now empty kind of bone marrow and set up shop and started, reproducing blood from scratch and rebuilding all of my blood, brand new again. But that takes time, and especially for the red blood cells, because those are the ones that there's the most of. So when you're short on red blood cells, when you don't have enough in your system, that's called anemic. We've all heard that term. That means you've got less than the normal 45% blood of your blood being red blood cells. And part of the red blood cells is hemoglobin, which is what carries the oxygen in our blood throughout our body. And without enough red blood cells and hemoglobin, you're going to feel anemic, which is very weak. And part of the reason you feel weak is because your heart's working harder to push that inefficient blood through your body to feed it. Maybe that's kind of like how a lack of trucks causes a supply chain problem. So now that you're a blood expert, you can understand that it was pretty abnormal when my blood counts dipped down to the point where my white blood cells were 0 and my red blood cells were only about, they were down to 20% instead of 45 of my total blood volume, so less than half. And this is basically just enough functional blood to kind of survive. And the blood cells, my blood cells died off gradually over about 2 weeks from when the chemotherapy began until it reached that low point. And at that point, because of the lack of hemoglobin and red blood cells, my heart was working so much harder that my resting heart rate was around 100 beats per minute, just sitting in a chair. And that's about almost twice as fast as it normally would be for me. And so that elevated heart rate and anemia made me feel exhausted all the time. And the symptoms of anemia really tell the story of how I felt at that point. Headache, insomnia, fatigue, dizziness, difficulty concentrating. And at the same time I was having all this from anemia, I was also having crazy side effects from the chemotherapy that was in my body. And I'll tell you more about that in a minute. So the last time I had blood tests done was a couple weeks ago, 4 months after the transplant. At that time, my red blood cells were still only at 37% of my total blood volume, so still quite a bit below the normal 45%. and my red blood cell and hemoglobin counts were still well below normal. I was surprised to see that because I'm actually feeling normal and working out quite a bit and feeling pretty good. So I'm really looking forward to those numbers improving so I can feel even better. So next I'm going to share some details about what went on in the hospital. I was there for exactly 3 weeks, and after that I had to spend another 3 weeks isolated away from people, and I did that staying at my mom's house, so I was away from everybody except my mom and stepdad. Couldn't see my kids really at all. So between the hospital and that post-hospital isolation was 6 weeks away from home. So when I was in the hospital, um, I had to take a shower twice a day and scrub my entire body with some special soap because one of the drugs in the chemo treatment was something that came out of the skin and out of the pores and causes a lot of irritation and rash. And I did that. I took the showers, I used the soap, I did everything they said, but I still got some pretty bad skin rash. It was hard taking those showers some days. When I was towards the end and I was really weak, taking 2 showers was my activity for the day. That was all I had energy for. So the skin rash, it started on my shoulders and my head, and then it spread to my entire body. And it would really flare up the most anywhere that anything was touching or rubbing on my skin. And when it got to its worst point, I wasn't able to wear clothes at all. And I would just wear the hospital gown because anything touching me was unbearable. And it was the worst on my back and my butt because of laying and sitting all the time. And that problem made it really hard to sleep. I would try to lay on the parts that were less irritated until they got irritated, and then I'd flop over onto find another fresh spot, and it felt like I had bugs crawling all over my body. So it got better eventually when I got out of the hospital, but even now I still have occasional little spots here and there where my skin gets really irritated, and I guess it's because the chemicals are still finding their way out of me. I don't know. Another fun thing was constipation and diarrhea. Not at the same time, but the drugs were causing crazy stuff to happen, and so they would give me other treatments, other medicines to combat that, and so it would go from one to the other, and things were just never like quite right, never in balance. It was always screwed up, and then there was hemorrhoids on top of that, and that was pretty awesome. Mouth sores were another part of it. This type of chemotherapy, most chemotherapies cause mouth problems, and this was no different, only it was worse. So they had me chew on ice chunks for about 30 minutes every time that a certain chemical was infused, and that wasn't any fun, but I did it, and it was probably worth it. It probably helped. I did get some pretty nasty mouth sores, but probably not as bad as some people get. The same things that cause those mouth sores also cause food to not taste right, and I definitely had that problem. And those things combined really make it hard to eat. And I was nauseous all the time almost. And I did have some episodes of vomiting, not too bad, but that did happen. And like I said, with food tasting so bad and everything else, I didn't have any appetite, and even water tasted horrible. So I didn't want to eat, but they encouraged me to, and I did. I wanted to keep my my system working. So I forced myself to eat 1 or 2 small meals every day. Like I said, sleeping was hard, not only because of the skin rash problems, but also insomnia caused by anemia. And then also, there's all kinds of lights in the room and noises from equipment. It's everything. It just makes it hard. I tried to wear earplugs and an eye mask, which did help, but then the skin problems would flare up where that stuff was touching me, and like even inside of my ears got really irritated and kind of blistery in there, and yeah, it wasn't good. So even though it was hard to sleep, I slept on and off for about 14 hours a day because I was really tired. And any sleep that I could get was always interrupted. At a minimum, I'd be interrupted once every 4 hours when they would come in to check my vital signs. And the worst one of those was the 4 a.m. daily check, where they would also need to take blood for testing every day. They didn't need to stick me with a needle with it because they'd pull it out of the IV, but it was still, lights on, noise, and a full disruption. So when I got out of the hospital, I really loved sleep and slept quite a bit for a while. So I had that IV in me, and I was hooked up to some kind of IVs, some kind of fluids being pumped into me probably 90% of the time that I was there, which makes everything difficult. Moving around in the room, taking a shower, walking around, you have to drag that IV around with you. It's really inconvenient. In the first week or so, I did do some exercise. I found an exercise bike in the hall, and I used that a few times. And I also did some walking. There was a loop around the hall in the area I was allowed to be in. That was maybe 100 yards long. I'd do that a few times. I did that when I could, but towards the end, like the last 5 to 10 days, I never left my room because it just wasn't happening. I wasn't really ready for how the anemia and the drugs would affect me physically and mentally. I brought a bunch of books over there, and I thought I was going to get all caught up and have all this spare time. But the reality was I didn't get to hardly any of it. And that was, now I know looking back, it was because I didn't have any attention span or any energy. So I spent a lot of my time sleeping or just kind of mindlessly watching TV, or just kind of sitting around. Watched a lot of baseball games. It was nice. The Giants were winning at that time. So the problems with the nasty chemicals in my body, they might not have been as bad if I didn't have anemic blood at the same time, but they kind of went together. And when you have both of those problems combined, the body just isn't really able to deal with it.
Taken together, they're truly consequential.
They explained it to me this way, like with the blood all screwed up, the body can't deal with or correct problems like the skin problem, and so the problems just get magnified, and it can really get out of control, and that's part of the reason that people have to be hospitalized for so long. My 21 days in the hospital is about as fast as you could get this procedure done. When I was in the hospital, everything went according to plan. And then, like I said, when I got out, I wasn't able to go home for another 3 weeks. And that was because, I had to live in a bubble. I was extremely vulnerable to any kind of germs, mold, any food issues, any infections, cuts, anything. So couldn't see anybody during that time, not even really my kids. And speaking of that, for the first time in any of these treatments, I did have a setback, and that was about a week after I got out of the hospital. I saw my kids for about 15 minutes and talked to them and gave them a big hug and sent them home. And then just a couple hours later, started feeling bad. I got a fever of 102. So I called UCSF, and they said take some Tylenol and go straight to John Muir emergency room. And I did that, and the fever went away pretty quick, but the doctors weren't satisfied, so they wanted to run 100 tests on me. And they made me stay at John Muir for 2 nights. And the first night I was in the emergency room the whole time till 6 a.m. And I literally lost the entire night's sleep, and really wasn't feeling good. And during that time, for whatever reason, the skin rash, which had started to improve a little bit, it came roaring back all over my body. Here it comes. And everything that was going on, that was just a real low point. And looking back, it wasn't such a big deal, but at the time, that really sucked. So after that, though, things ran smoothly, and I started to get to the point where I'd feel better each day and started to go for walks. And at first, I couldn't even walk, I couldn't even walk to the mailbox hardly. And then I got, quickly stronger and better and started to exercise a little bit. And then food started to taste normal again, and then right after that, food didn't just taste normal, it tasted awesome. And so because of that new appreciation for food, I didn't restrict myself with any specific diet. I just enjoyed it, and it was great. I'm eating a little bit healthier now, but it's still good. So because the parts of my blood that handle immunity were completely destroyed and then rebuilt from scratch, those new blood cells don't have any of the immunity memory that my old ones did. They're brand new, and it's just like a baby. So that means I need to get all the vaccines again, and you can't do that right away. Those cells need to mature for a few months before they're ready to have a vaccine work correctly. So I had to wait 3 months, and the first vaccine I was able to get was the COVID vaccine, which I got a couple weeks ago. Also got my first shingles vaccine now. I got the flu shot, and then I have to wait a couple more months, and then I can get revaccinated for everything else, like tetanus, polio, measles, hepatitis, whatever else there is. So looking forward to all those jabs. So now I've been back to work for about 6 weeks, and everything's pretty much normal again. And right now that means scrambling around to get ready for Christmas, just like you probably are. And hopefully I get to see some of you and around the holidays, and I look forward to seeing everybody again soon, and hopefully in person. So that's it for now. Everybody have a Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays and all that stuff. Thanks for all your well wishes. Take care. Thanks. Good night.